Hello, thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I am David Pendergrass. At the time of this recording, it has been several moons since I've recorded anything. I was gone on vacation to God's favorite place, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. If you have ever been to a Cracker Barrel, it's as if Cracker Barrel made a city, and that is Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, Sevierville, they're all close together, but we actually stayed in Pigeon Forge, and I love it. I love it. I'm going to start singing some bluegrass, but I can't play the banjo. But anyway, I love it. It's a great place to go. The family loves it, and my even kids, I've converted them. My wife's still favorite place is the beach, but pray for her. Pray for her. We're glad I had a good time there. Then we came back and did some other stuff and work. And also, in the meantime, I have now actually accepted an offer to be the lead pastor at a new church. And so that has taken up a couple weeks of our time. That mixed with between that and working my job, part-time job, it's just been a busy few weeks. In fact, it's been almost a month since I've recorded. And we're back in the swing of things now. We're excited about that. So if at the time of this recording, or no matter when the time, whenever you listen to it, feel free to say a prayer for me and my family that we have God's wisdom and do the very best job that we can, communicating the gospel and helping be a part of what God's kingdom is doing on earth. And we are excited about that. I wanted to have just a couple reflections today, and not to go too long into it, but reflections. At the time of this recording, this is where a lot of stuff's going on in the world in America, where the Black Lives Matter, and there are people, it's diminished some, but people who have ransacked buildings, they have defaced monuments, torn them down, they have shot people, killed people, thrown things at the police, they have established independent little towns and cities, and so forth, and I have a lot of opinions about that. But one thing in particular that has been interesting to me is online people putting comments about the rioters and why it's justified. They don't use the word justify, but that's exactly what it is. They're trying to justify their behavior. And what they do is give different reasons for it. One is a common one I've seen a few times people post on Facebook, is in reference to the Boston Tea Party. Of course, the Boston Tea Party was a political movement of the late 18th century in the United States, where the colonists rejected the Tea Act, where they taxed them, and there's a lot of taxation that occurred back at the time period, and they had an expression there, no taxation without representation. Basically, the British were taxing the American colonists and on just about everything, particularly paper and stamps and tea and whatever, and they'd had enough, and so they threw overboard over 300 crates of tea to rebel against this taxation without representation. So some people give that as an example of, that's an example of people who are causing violence and destroying property for an act of injustice. And to that I would say is that might be an example. I'm not exactly sure what the analogy is supposed to be. If the analogy is, or the argument is, any behavior of violence that is destructive in nature, that is the end goal is destructive, to destroy something, it is justified as long as there is an historical event that is like it. If that's the argument, then I find that very unpersuasive. Just because an event occurred in history where they thought something was unjustified and therefore they caused destruction, it doesn't therefore follow that today it's moral. Because what you need to decide is whether or not in the first place it ever happened, whether that was moral. And so what we have in ethics is this called a consequentialist argument, that it is right to cause destruction and hurt and kill people, even when necessary, as an act of rebellion against some kind of injustice. And so the end result is good because it's either, and that's where people give various different answers to what's the end result. The end result is what? Social change, political change, laws to change, cultural awareness. A lot of people, it's just a vent. They're just so upset they need a vent. And so the end result is that, where the means is to that end, the means is the destruction of property, stealing electronics, robbing people's homes, causing violence, throwing things at the police, and so forth. And so again, this argument is, if I can go to find any event in history, in American history, where they did something like this, it therefore means what they're doing right now is justified. My own view is that is not convincing. That's not a compelling argument to make. Because you need there's not. There's several reasons why. I actually don't want to spend too much time on that. I want to talk about the Bible, because I care about that a lot more. But my response is, even then, I do not think what happened by the Boston Tea Party was actually appropriate to do either. I think destroying what in essence is private property an act of rebellion is an unethical thing to do. It was wrong for them to do it, even for the reasons they gave. That's not a good reason. The question is it ever morally acceptable to cause violence for the sake of violence alone? Is that the end result? Or is violence an end? Is it a means to an end? And it depends on what the end is. And also depends if you think consequentialist ethics are a good thing. So are there times when causing some kind of violence or destruction acceptable? And I would say is, in principle, that is certainly possible. It just depends on what the reason is, and depends on what your end goal is. And I don't think picking an example from history makes it therefore justifiable. You need something where it was justifiable. In my view, it's not. It was not back then. It therefore still is not now. So on my view now, when it comes to modern politics, I think any single person at all, no matter how upset they are, destroys private property. What they're doing is both illegal and unethical. Most certainly, it's unchristian. And people say, "Well, what I really appreciate is you have to understand how upset they are." Again, my appreciation for a person's upsetness does not justify the end. The same argument could be made for every single person who murders someone. Every single time a spouse kills someone. You gotta understand, David, she made me very mad. I had to kill her. You don't understand the rage I felt that night. I had been fired from my job. I drank a little too many beers or whatever, and I wasn't fully myself, and she made me so mad I had to kill her. You don't know my pain, David. You don't know my childhood. Which I can get on. This is, in courtroom, we call that diminished responsibility. They weren't really responsible. It's like a degree of a plea of insanity, that I lost control. Now, if someone's saying that a person has lost control, they've literally reached a state of insanity, and that's why they're causing the violence. That's fine, but it's not therefore justifiable. That is, it's no longer a moral act. What you're doing is admitting what you did was wrong, and now you're trying to give a justification by the wrong behavior. But that's not, in fact, what most looters are trying to do, and most people online are trying to do. They're not trying to say what they're doing is wrong, and here's why they're doing it. What they're trying to argue is what they're doing is right, and here's why they're doing it. Those are very different things. My view is, one more time, is every single time you destroy private property, you go in to steal things, you hurt people, you cause violence and destruction, no matter of upsetness, your emotional state will not justify that. Now, I'm a Christian, and that's different for people who are not Christians. Pagans, if you're just evolved chimps, that's all we are, or maybe you're of different religious persuasions or faiths, or you're an atheist or a Satan worshiper or Muslim, Buddhist, whatever. You have different ethical system. But as a Christian, I would find that overwhelmingly unconvincing. And I cannot fathom how any Christian would ever support such a belief. Ever. Ever, ever, ever. This leads me to the other point, part 2, basically, of this podcast, short and sweet. We'll see if it's short. And we'll see if it's sweet. I don't know. And that is when people go to the Bible for their justification and say, David, well, hold on now, David. Jesus overturned the money changers temple. At the temple. At the tables of the temple. And so a person says, see, there's an act of violence. Now, again, I'm back to figure out. So let's just a little context real quickly. If you don't know this, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, at the end of Jesus' ministry, one of the things, the precipitative act, the thing that really makes the religious leadership really ticked off, is Jesus goes in and overturns, literally, I mean, that's not a metaphor. We use that in American English now, but sometimes as a metaphor. He literally goes up to the tables where people were employed by the temple to be money converters, because people would take in money, foreign currency from around the Roman Empire if they were a Jew, and they had to come in to pay their perfunctory temple tax before they could offer their offering of their sacrifice. And to pay that tax, you had to use the local temple currency because it did not have any foreign images on the coinage. So you had to switch over to the tire. It's a silver piece made locally, basically, and it had basically stable rate of what it was worth. But anyway, I'm not going to get bogged down on that right now. The point is, what they were doing was a necessary function, because foreign currency, particularly from the Roman currency, it had an image of the Caesar on it. You weren't supposed to have any images anywhere in the temple. And so these people were employed by the temple to change your money. So you came into town, it's like bringing your pesos or your Canadian cash, whatever, and you would change it to, like we'd say, like to American dollars. And yeah, they probably got a little cut and some profit from it for sure. And that's what they did. Well, then they would give you money you could use, and you could use that money, then go into the Temple Mount and purchase animals to use for your offering or your sacrifice. Now, if you could bring your own animal that was unblemished, that's great. The problem is it was very difficult for most people who came to Jerusalem during Pesach or Passover. They could not afford to carry their animal in a special place thing to make sure the animal didn't break his leg and on the way there. So what the cheapest option to do was you saved up some cash, you brought your money, you did your money exchange, then you went to the temple ground to their big fat zoo, basically, of animals they had raised all year long, and you bought one there on the spot, and you offered it to them. So it was a necessary thing. Okay, Jesus goes into there, and he overturns the table. Now, in John's gospel, it's early in his ministry, and so some people say Jesus must have done it twice, and that's certainly possible. Most New Testament scholars disagree. Most New Testament scholars think John has moved this incident to the beginning of his gospel because John is trying to make sure that his audience knows that Jesus is a walking temple. That from the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, we're supposed to realize that the temple is defunct. It is no longer useful now that Jesus is here. He's a walking tabernacle, walking temple. So there's a theological reason to change the chronology. But you can have your own view on that. It's just that is the standard view amongst scholarship. Anyway, he does do it, and he overturns the table, gets people really upset. Okay, so some people say, see, David, that's an example. Now, what's unclear to me is precisely what kind of analogy a person's trying to make. And there are two different things to do about this, two different ways to come at this, it seems to me. And this is what I do in all my podcasts and sermons and lessons and whatever. And that is when you go to the biblical text, which I think we always should go to the biblical text first, and then which I do, there's two major steps. Step one is what we call exegesis. What is the text meant to them? We try to discover what it meant to them, and that's usually where you employ all kinds of historical critical methods, literary methods, to try to figure out what the words and the concepts meant to them, an ancient person 2,000 years ago, or 3,000 or 4,000, depending on which text you're reading. But in this text, the Gospels, it's roughly 2,000 years ago. So the first question is, what did Jesus' behavior act mean to them? What was he thinking? What did it mean to them when they saw it and experienced it? The second step is different. The second step is to ask the question, now what do I do? What does it mean to me today? And loosely we call this hermeneutics. That's where you connect the dots. That's where you time travel back to our present day. So step one, what did it mean to them? Step two is, what does it mean to us today? And that sequence matters. Most people do not have a sequence because most people skip over step number one, except for scholars. And that to me is one of the greatest horrible embarrassments of the modern church. Is that no one has a clue what was going on in the ancient world because they're so uneducated. And then we shove down everyone's throat this idea that everyone's a minister and everyone doesn't need to learn any education and they don't know what they're talking about. So by the time you get to step two, it's a free-for-all. People who do have training in step number one of what did it mean to the ancient world, they find the most frustration with people like that because their step two is always disagrees and it's always quite bizarre. Not always. That's exaggerative. It's often quite bizarre. Because they'll say, well, it means to us today blank. When you go, why did you think that? It never, ever, ever could have meant something close to that at all in the first century. So it gives us parameters. It's not a power struggle. It's not as if people who study step number one, they can, but that's not, they can be punks. They can be condescending punks. But just because they study it doesn't mean they are a condescending punk. Instead, people like me, hopefully I'm not one, it just means that our goal is we're trying to help people at minimum have parameters or boundaries upon our interpretation. So then when we go to what does it mean to us today, we can't say, what it really means for us today is that aliens are among us and that we should all go worship Satan. So, well, it can't mean that. It can't mean that because that's not, that has nothing to do with the first century. So it just gives us limits on stuff that would hopefully stay within what we call orthodoxy. Okay, step one, step two. So when I ask a person today, if I were to ask them, when you say modern rioters and looters, and then we will look at Jesus, I'm trying to figure out which of these things they think is a comparison. Is it exegesis or is it hermeneutics? Do they think Jesus is like an ancient looter? Is Jesus an ancient rioter? Is that what they think what was going on in the first century? Or two, are they saying yes or no, but step two is this is how we should apply it? So I'm not sure. So let me briefly explore both of those options and tell you what my view is. So the first thing is, nobody in scholarship, and again, maybe just, if you listen to my podcast often, you'll maybe believe me when I say this, just because of detail. I'm not going to go through all the details right now because just trying to get a brief podcast. And secondly, just because I'm saying most scholars doesn't, I'm not making an argument from authority as if you have to believe this way too, because scholars think that way. I'm just saying this is the way it is, and and I find it most persuasive as well. That when you read the Gospels carefully and you read that narrative closely, Jesus is not a looter. He's not a rioter. Jesus does not go to the temple one day and just one day, if you read it in ancient context, it sure does not seem to be the case that Jesus one day just has a bad day and loses his temper and then goes crazy. Or that he has pent-up energy for a long time of something and decides to go cause destruction and then go home. Jesus doesn't steal anything. He doesn't rob anybody. He doesn't deface personal property with spray paint. He doesn't hurt people. He doesn't throw rocks and bricks at the Pharisee police officers. I mean, the temple police officers. They have temple guards who have been kind of like police officers. He doesn't do that at all. So he doesn't tear down statues. He doesn't. I mean, I don't know. He doesn't start a movement called Jewish Lives Matter. I mean, I don't know. The point is, I'm not sure if a person's trying to draw an analogy to the ancient world. I don't get it. The one thing, if I were to grant that's a similarity, is that Jesus does something that you might call an act of violence. He overturns the money changers. In fact, in John's gospel, it says he gets a rope, he turns to a cord, and he starts whipping people, like the ground, or whipping you, like, get out of here, get out, almost like you're doing a fly swatter. And that's not a peaceful protest there. I mean, that's an act of violence. If someone says that's the only point we're making, I'll say, well, fine. But to me, it matters very much what they're doing when it comes to the violent protests. What are they doing? Is Jesus trying to kill people? No. Is he stealing anything from a store? No. Is he, I mean, on and on. Is he knocking over the temple pillars? No. Is he causing other people to join his cause to go hurt the priest? Go kill him. Go get him. We should defund all the priests. And I mean, he doesn't do any of that stuff. So, I mean, I guess in all fairness, I just don't see what the analogy is besides it isn't simple an act of violence. But the question now is, what is the act of violence attempting to communicate? What Jesus is trying to communicate, that virtually all New Testament scholars concur, is that the temple leadership have lost its function. It's lost, the leadership function is now devoid. So, or say it this way, you might say the Temple Mount no longer works. Now, that was a common critique. It wasn't ubiquitous, but it was common. I mean, the Essenes, the Qumran community said something similar. Josephus said something similar. Some of the rabbis even said something similar, that some of the priests at the temple had lost their function. They become corrupt. And Jews had different responses to that. The temple leadership has become corrupt. Now what do? Some said, well, what's going to happen is God is going to bring down the heavenly temple. There is an earthly temple and there's a heavenly temple. He's going to bring down the heavenly temple and everything's going to be okay. Others didn't say that. Others said, no, what's going to happen is he's going to make sure the bad temple leaders get out and he's going to establish good temple leaders. Jesus said neither. He never said that he's going to help establish a brand new heavenly temple, nor that he should put pure ones. Jesus, in fact, just condemns them and then leaves. And in fact, if you know your Gospels, he should be a house of prayer for all nations. What's unclear, and I have other podcasts on it, it's unclear if Jesus' protest has been precipitated because the money changers probably were not there, but a few years before this event, we have evidence that in Josephus, who's a Jewish author, we have evidence that this was a fairly new occurrence. And so we're not exactly sure if Jesus is extra worked up because this just happened, or if something else. That's unclear. But what is clear is that this is, we say in scholarship, this is a prophetic sign act. So as a prophet of God, he is enacting a judgment upon the temple leadership. That what this is not is an act of violence because of some injustice. This is a prophetic sign act, like when Jeremiah smashed clay pots to prove his points, or Isaiah slept on one side, and on it goes. It's an outward sign act of a biblical, a God message through a prophet. And that's virtually what all New Testament scholars believe. So that's the major distinction between an ancient first step, exegesis between a modern person today is Black Lives Matter, and that's a sweeping term, but anybody who's a looter, anyone who's causing destruction, if a person thinks they're used by God as a prophetic sign act in modern times, I just don't find that persuasive whatsoever. You might be able to convince me, but I can't fathom what the evidence would be. I don't know. I don't know what it'd be. It just seems to me that it's just simply a disanalogy. That what Jesus was attempting to accomplish and what he did accomplish by judging the temple, that one-time event, has nothing to do with causing destruction and hurting people. I can't fathom. And then the step 2 when it comes to hermeneutics is maybe people who say, well, look at Jesus today, they're trying to draw analogy not to the ancient context, but the second step, which is how we Christians apply that. Well, again, if step 1 is off, to me, step 2 has to be off as well. Because then I'm going to ask the question, what do you think the application is? Is the application that Jesus is really teaching his disciples that every single time you sense something you don't like, you're supposed to go do an act of violence? If that's what you think every single time, then I fundamentally disagree with you, and the New Testament disagrees with you. Jesus never taught his disciples that. He never explicitly said that, nor did the early church get that message. We have no other instance at all, anywhere in the New Testament or in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, where people said, the message of Jesus is that when there's injustice that we think is an injustice, our goal then is to go make sure we enact violence to get the point. So if that's what your point you're making today is, I don't find that persuasive. If your argument is not that it should always be the case, but there are certain special times when the Christian response is to enact violence, my response is, I don't find that persuasive at all, because there is no biblical warrant for that at all. I cannot fathom Jesus defacing statues, throwing bricks at the police officers, shooting people, robbing DVD players and TVDs from Best Buy or whatever, putting things on fire, screaming horrible cuss words and horrible things to people. I just cannot fathom that. No matter how upset Jesus got, he would not have done that. He did not do that. What Jesus did in response to injustice was to die on the cross. Again, well, I'm going for a long time about that. But so it seems to me that there is simply a disanalogy if any kind of biblical argument one might use. So back to the historical argument of the Tea Party, my response is you need to look at each individual case to see if what they did was right or wrong, depending on why they did it and so forth. But what matters to me the most is a biblical reason, and I can't find any reason whatsoever to think of Jesus overturning the money changers is a good analogy, both not on exegetical grounds, that is what happened in the ancient world, and 2, not on hermeneutical grounds on what it means to us today. It just seems to me that it is unfathomable for a disciple of Jesus to support looting and the rampage that happens. It's just unfathomable. I cannot fathom it. Not as a Christian, I can't. The way of Jesus is not violence. The way of Jesus is not to go kill people and burn things and deface property. It's just not the way of Jesus. And if you go back to the money changers temple, again, I'm going to go back to the ancient context. I'll go back with you one more time and say, but help me understand, why do you think Jesus did what he did? And exactly what did he do? But why do you think he did that? And if you don't think it was a prophetic sign act, that's fine. You just need to write a really good paper and try to persuade all the rest of us that that's not what Jesus was doing. That Jesus really was a social justice warrior, or he was fighting for the Jews who were not represented. I don't know what your argument would be. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, make it. You can make it. I've never heard one ever that's persuasive. I think the most persuasive argument is that Jesus, in fact, was doing something very specific for a very specific moment in time, and he only did it once, and that was because what he was doing was very specific for one time, and it was not at all a model for his disciples. Everything Jesus did in his ministry was not a model for his disciples. Jesus called 12 people to be the leaders of the disciples. He never told his disciples to go form 12-member group disciple-making groups. He never said that. Jesus himself walked around Galilee with his ministry chiefly, but he never told his disciples, you must only do ministry in Galilee. I could go down the list of all the things. Jesus himself were baptized and heard the Spirit that said, you're my son. It doesn't mean every disciple of Jesus also gets baptized, and we're also commissioned by the Spirit that tells us we're also God's beloved son. Jesus' disciples don't die on the cross to atone for the sins of humanity like Jesus did. Jesus' disciples are not raised on the third day if that happens. I mean, the long list of things, just because Jesus did it doesn't mean everything he did, Jesus' disciples are supposed to do. And so if that's your belief as well, then I frankly also disagree with that point. So anyway, that's all. I'm sorry if this podcast comes across as I just disagree with everything, because I really don't. And I very much appreciate, if you know me and my podcast at all, I very much appreciate trying to understand what Jesus did and what he said, and to see if it is an example for his disciples. I'm all for that high five all day long. It's just on this particular issue, I find it very unpersuasive. And if it is unpersuasive, and if I am right, it means that Christians have no business supporting this very un-Christ-like, unethical behavior. We would expect it of pagans, but not of disciples of Jesus. That's not the way of Jesus. We have a much better way. We lay down our lives for our friends and for our enemies. We don't destroy things. We don't call them names. We don't hurt them. Ever. That's not the way of a Christian. So maybe you think on those things. If you have a different view, let me know. Send me an email, and maybe you can change my mind, and that'd be great. So teach me how to read the Bible better. I mean it, because I want to read it just right, so that I get it right, so I get Jesus right. That's for sure. And help me on that if you've got a better way. And God bless you. See you next time. Well, the conversation isn't finished. You can always reach out to me on social media. Are you on Facebook? I am too. At Glimpse of the Kingdom. Glimpse of the Kingdom on Facebook. Be sure to like it, and you can see updates there. Also, if you're on Twitter, check me out at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass, or at Glimpse the King, at Glimpse the King. And I try my best to respond to comments and questions on there as quickly as I can. If you want more, there are many more resources on the podcast and my blog. Go to my website, davidpendergrass.com, and you can see a full list of the podcast, and my blog is available for free. Are you active in a church right now? I'd be happy to come out to your church and do all kinds of classes and workshops there. Check out davidpendergrass.com, davidpendergrass.com for more information. And may God in His great grace give you even just a glimpse of His kingdom this week. See you next time.